Okay. Hello again. Now we have finished the second part of the book. Let me compare and contrast the first part and the second part. In the first part, Gulliver goes to the land of the tiny people, which was called Lilliput. And the tiny people were called Lilliputians. And Gulliver was the huge giant man, and he was very strong. But he realizes that the strength and power are not related to the size of your body, because sometimes he was very weak, sometimes he was in shameful situations like in the toilet. And so many people come together and they can capture him, tie him to the ground. And secondly, he goes to another land, which is the land of the giants, called Brobdingnag. And in Brobdingnag, he becomes a tiny person to be dominated by giant creatures. So in this case, the concept of power changes, of course. The concept of power is a relative thing. And in this big land, he becomes the weak person, the weak human being, and he can't do anything by himself. He's carried by everyone around. So then people need to change their perspective to understand the concept of power and to understand the reality about themselves. There's another political perspective here. When he talks about his country, the king of Brobdingnag criticizes English system, criticizes British Empire's government system, and Gulliver notices that there are the government system of British Empire is not so ideal, because the king starts finding mistakes. So when he changes his perspective, he sees the negative sides of his country. Now, the next chapter, the next part 3, is a voyage to Laputa, Balnibarbi, Glabdabdrip, Lagnac, and Japan. So he goes to another continent which contains these countries: Laputa, Balnibarbi, Glabdabdrip, Lagnac, and Japan. I had not been above home 10 days when Captain William Robinson, a Cornishman, commander of the Hopewell, a stout ship of 300 tons, came to my house. So the captain comes to his house and offers him a job. Now, I had formerly been surgeon of another ship where he was master, and the fourth part owner. In a voyage to the Levant, he had always treated me more like a brother than an inferior officer, and hearing of my arrival made me a visit, as I apprehended, only out of friendship, for nothing more than what is usual after long absences. But repeating his visits often, expressing his joy to find me in a good health, asking whether I were now settled for life, adding that he intended a voyage to the East Indies in 2 months, at last he plainly invited me, though with some apologies, to be surgeon of the ship, that I should have another surgeon under me besides our 2 mates, that my salary should be double to the usual pay, that having experienced my knowledge in sea affairs to be at least equal to his, he would enter into any engagement to follow my advice, as much as if I had share in the command. So his experiences made him very famous, and one of the captains that he used to work earlier comes to his house, visits his house very often to convince him to come to the sea again, although his wife and family don't want to let him go. He said so many obliging things that I knew him to be so honest a man that I could not reject his proposal. The thirst I had of seeing the world, so he's very thirsty to see the other parts of the world, notwithstanding my past misfortunes continuing as violent as ever. So he cannot stop his desires, he cannot repress his desires to see the sea again. The only difficulty that remained was to persuade my wife. So, wife is difficult to persuade. Wives are difficult to persuade. Whose consent, however, I at last obtained by the prospect of advantage. She proposed to her children. Okay, so he goes to the ship. All right, and yes, there are adventures, details of getting on the ship. On the next page, the largest of the pirate ships. The largest of the pirate ships was commanded by a Japanese captain who spoke a little Dutch, but very imperfectly. He came up to me, and after several questions which I answered in great humility, he said, "We should not die." I made the captain a very low bow, then turning to the Dutchman said, "I was sorry to find more mercy in the heathen than in a brother Christian." So they are captured by pirates, Japanese pirates now. But I had soon reason to repent those foolish words, for that malicious reprobate, having often endeavoured in vain to persuade both the captains that I might be thrown into the sea, which they would not yield to after the promise made me that I should not die. However, prevailed so far as to have a punishment inflicted on me worse in all human appearance than death itself. My men were sent by an equal division into both the pirate ships, my sloop new manned. As to myself, I was determined that I should be set adrift in a small canoe, with paddles and sail, and 4 days' provisions, which last the Japanese captain was so kind to double out of his own stores, would permit no man to search me. I got down into the canoe, while the Dutchman standing upon the deck loaded me with all the curses and injurious terms his language could afford. Now, he is given a canoe to sail to the coast, but he will arrive on a very different land again. The next day I sailed to another island, and thence to a third and fourth, sometimes using my sail and sometimes my paddles. But not to trouble the reader with a particular account of my distress, let it suffice that on the 5th day I arrived at the island in my sight, which lay southeast to the former. The island was at a greater distance than I expected, and I did not reach it in less than 5 hours. I encompassed it almost round before I could find a convenient place to land in, which was a small creek about 3 times the wideness of my canoe. I found the island to be all rocky, only a little intermingled with tufts of grass and sweet-smelling herbs. I took out my small provision. After having refreshed myself, I secured the remainder in a cave, whereof there were great numbers. So when he arrives on the island, he starts walking on the rocky surface of the island, and he notices that there's nothing green on the island. It's all stone and rocks, apart from some small, smelly herbs, little tiny grass. So, another interesting place, very hot. Towards the middle part of this paragraph, I walked a while among the rocks. The sky was perfectly clear, and the sun so hot that I was forced to turn my face from it, when all on a sudden it became obscured, as I thought, in a manner very differently from what happens by in the interposition of a cloud. So the sun is obstructed, but it's not like the clouds. I turned back and perceived a vast, opaque body between me and the sun, moving forwards towards the island. So he sees an opaque body. Opaque is the opposite of transparent. You can't see beyond. So it looks like a huge rock moving in the sky, approaching towards the island on which Gulliver is standing. It seemed to be about 2 miles high, hit the sun 6 or 7 minutes. I did not observe the air to be much colder or the sky more darkened than if I had stood under the shade of a mountain. But as it approached nearer over the place where I was, it appeared to be a firm substance, not the bottom flat, smooth and shining very bright from the reflection of the sea below. He sees that the bottom of that flying island is smooth and it reflects the reflection of the sun coming from the sea. You know, the sunlight strikes to the sea surface and the sea surface reflects the sunlight back, and it is reflected on the bottom surface, flat bottom surface of the island. He looks at it. And I did not observe, I stood upon a height about 200 yards from the shore and saw this vast body descending almost to a parallel with me at less than an English mile distance. I took out my pocket perspective, could plainly discover numbers of people moving up and down the sides of it, which appeared to be sloping, but what those people were doing, I was not able to distinguish. So he looks at them with his binoculars, and he sees that there are some people standing on the edge of the island, looking downwards at Gulliver. So, strange land. There's a floating island in the air. He's sitting on a strange land, looks upwards, and he sees that a whole rocky island is flying in the air, which is not enough. There are people standing on the edge of that island, looking downwards. The natural love of life gave me some inward motions of joy, and I was able to entertain a hope that this adventure might some way or other help me to deliver me from the desolate place and condition I was in. He loves life, and he wants to get rid of this condition he is standing in now. Maybe he hopes that those people upwards will protect him and rescue him from this condition. But at the same time, the reader can hardly conceive my astonishment to behold an island in the air, inhabited by men, who were able, as it should seem, to raise or sing, or to put it into progressive motion as they pleased. But not being at that time in a disposition as to philosophize upon this phenomenon, I rather chose to observe what course the island would take, because it seemed for a while to stand still. So the island is no more moving, but stopped. Yet, soon after it advanced nearer, I could see the sides of it, encompassed with several gradations of galleries and stairs at certain intervals to descend from one to the other. In the lowest gallery, I beheld some people fishing with long angling rods, others looking on. So he sees that people standing on the edge of the island are fishing with fishing rods down to the ocean. And I waved my cap. He takes out his hat and he waves to make himself visible, shouts at them. And my handkerchief towards the island upon its nearer approach. I called and shouted with the utmost strength of my voice. And then looking circumspectly, I beheld a crowd gather to that side, which was mostly in my view. I found there pointing towards me and to each other. So they notice Gulliver and they point at him, to each other. Look, they point. There's a strange guy downwards. And they plainly discovered me, although made no return to my shouting. But I could see 4 or 5 men running in great haste up the stairs to the top of the island, who then disappeared. I happened rightly to conjecture that these were sent for orders to some person in authority upon this occasion. Then I skip the next paragraph. They made signs for me to come down from the rock and go towards the shore. So they motioned him move away from that rock, go to the shore, which I accordingly did. And the flying island being raised to a convenient height, the verge directly over me, a chain was let down from the lowest gallery. So they let down a chain, and a seat on the tip of the chain, a seat is hung. So they let it down for Gulliver to sit on the seat, so they will pull him upwards. With a seat fastened to the bottom, to which I fixed myself and was drawn up by pulleys. And another strange adventure begins for Gulliver here on this land, on a floating island, okay, which is going to be an imaginary, fantastic place. So, as I said in the very beginning of this book is a fantastic book and a very good example of early fantastic fiction. And especially on this land, we're going to read about a lot of fantastic stories and a lot of fantastic adventures in an unrealistic setting. But this unrealistic setting has a lot of references to real life, a lot of references to even our day in which we are living now. So although this book was written in the 18th century and the story is set in the 17th century, and it is not set in a realistic setting in the real world that we are living in, but it is set in a fantastic setting, surrealistic setting. It has got a lot of wonderful references, political, philosophical references to our time. It has been survived. It has survived for many centuries, and we still talk about it. Wonderful book. Okay, that's all for today, and see you next week for the second chapter. If you have any questions, please write to me. Okay, I'm waiting for some questions if you have any. Okay? No questions? Just wave. Okay, I'm ending this session. Hope to see you next week.